It seems to happen like clockwork. As soon as a warranty runs out, things break and they're no longer covered. When your car is in that situation, though, you could be staring down thousands of dollars in repair bills. CarShield begins where your warranty ends, with service plans that cover those expensive surprises. They pay your favorite mechanic or dealership directly, making the entire process fast and easy. Get a free quote by calling 800-416-6522 or visit carshield.com to get your free quote.
On a deserted footpath, early on the morning of November 22nd, 1983, a hospital worker witnessed a terrible sight. It would be the first case in the world where DNA evidence helped find the killer. Narborough, England, a quiet little village of about 6,000 residents, where violent crime is almost unheard of.
It is something you expect to happen in a city, not in a small village community.
15-year-old Linda Mann was a typical teenager, quiet but popular. She liked school and enjoyed being with friends. On a cold November evening, Linda left her home in Narborough to walk the mile or so to her friend's house. When Linda didn't return home by midnight, her frantic parents called the police. Early the next morning, her semi-nude body was discovered along a secluded footpath known locally as the Black Pad. Detective David Baker was called to the scene.
Her clothing was in a state of disarray, her jeans removed, and her underclothes were strewn about. It was a cold night and she'd got a scarf around her neck, and the scarf had been used to strangle her.
She was very brutally attacked, sexually assaulted.
Word of Linda's murder traveled quickly in the otherwise quiet village.
The people were horrified. I'm very worried, particularly those with young girls, young daughters.
A search of the crime scene turned up little of substance, but the autopsy provided some important clues about Linda Mann's last moments alive.
The absence of injury to her private parts, and also generally on her body, there was very little injury to her, would suggest that it was not a violent attack and that she may have died very quickly.
The conclusion was that she was strangled and then raped.
A semen sample taken from Linda's body turned out to be an extremely important piece of evidence. It came from an individual with type A blood and a PGM1+ enzyme profile, but this matched 10% of the adult male population in England. Since Linda Mann's body was found only a few hundred yards from a local psychiatric hospital, some speculated that the killer may have been a patient. Others weren't so sure.
The thing that I was very anxious to establish was that it was unlikely to have been a psychiatric patient from the hospital. It was much more likely to be a man leading a normal life, perhaps with a family, certainly one who had friends, relatives, and contacts who thought of him as a normal individual.
Linda Mann was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Former cop turned author Joseph Wambaugh wrote a best-selling book entitled The Blooding. It chronicles the events surrounding the murder of Linda Mann and the history-making investigation which would follow.
It's very unusual in a village like Narborough in Britain for a complete stranger to ambush and murder someone on a footpath. I mean, it was so unheard of.
Police questioned thousands of people about Linda Mann's whereabouts on the night she was killed.
They put more into a murder investigation over there, which they call an inquiry, than we do here, because they have so few murders compared to us.
Linda Mann was buried in a churchyard not far from where she was murdered. On the day of her funeral, police set up a surveillance and videotaped the crowd for anything or anyone unusual.
Often one finds that criminals will revisit the scene of the crime or some other activity associated with the crime.
But it was of little help. The investigation dragged on for months, then a year. With no eyewitnesses, few strong leads, and several false trails, the murder hunt hit a dead end.
It's always frustrating when you've not got an answer to a problem, and I mean you're forever looking over your shoulder, to see what you've missed, and then trying to guess what might happen in the future.
And the search for Linda Mann's killer continued for the next 3 years. Three years had passed since the murder of Linda Mann, and life in the small village of Narborough was beginning to return to normal. Until the afternoon of July 31st, 1986. Another 15-year-old schoolgirl, Dawn Ashworth, was walking home from her part-time job at a newsstand. Instead of taking the main road, she took a shortcut down a thickly overgrown footpath called 10 Pound Lane. When Dawn didn't return home by 9:30 that night, her parents called the police. Another teenage girl was missing.
Dawn Ashworth went missing last night.
We've all hoped and prayed that this was not a repeat of the Linda Mann case, yes.
2 days later, police discovered Dawn Ashworth's nude body under some heavy brush and hay. She was discovered less than a mile from where Linda Mann was murdered 3 years earlier. Like Linda Mann, Dawn Ashworth had been strangled and sexually assaulted.
Dawn had quite marked injuries to her genital area, which would indicate it was a very violent attack. And her injuries elsewhere in the body would also indicate that she had suffered violent injury, therefore she'd been attacked violently, which would indicate that she had put up a fair struggle before she died.
Semen samples taken during Dawn's autopsy revealed that the attacker had the same blood type as Linda Mann's murderer. There were other similarities as well.
There were signature elements in the crime, certainly. Both murders took place on footpaths. Both girls were teenagers. Both girls were walking alone.
Both manually strangled, both severely sexually assaulted.
All schoolgirls were advised to travel in groups and not to walk anywhere alone. Dawn Ashworth's father had given his daughter the same advice.
I wonder about the dangers of going down there on our own.
We've got to find the fiend, really, that did this to my daughter, to our daughter, and stop it from happening again.
Police launched an extensive investigation into the murder of Dawn Ashworth, and within a week, police got a break. Witnesses saw a young man in the vicinity of 10 Pound Lane on the afternoon of Dawn Ashworth's death. He was 17-year-old Richard Buckland, a kitchen worker at the psychiatric hospital, located just a few hundred yards from where both Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth had been murdered. Police brought him in for questioning, and he quickly became their prime suspect. For one thing, he knew details of the murder which weren't in the newspapers.
In addition to that, when we'd questioned Mr. Buckland, he couldn't really account for his movements on that particular afternoon.
Finally, after 15 grueling hours of interrogation, Richard Buckland confessed to the rape and murder of Dawn Ashworth. Police finally had their man. Given the similarities between the two murders, police were convinced that Buckland also raped and murdered Linda Mann 3 years earlier. Buckland denied it. Was he telling the truth? The answer lay just a few miles away, in a university laboratory.
This program is brought to you by Generation Y, a podcast from Wondery. Imagine you have two friends who are obsessed with stories of crime, murder, and unsolved mysteries. That is Generation Y, a podcast where hosts Aaron and Justin explore theories, dive into forensic evidence, and share their opinions. In an all-new episode, Generation Y examines the case of Jonathan Amaral, a 25-year-old biomedical engineer in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. One weekend, he goes off on a hiking trip. He never comes back. After Jonathan fails to show up for work, his mother finds out and reports him missing. That same day, Brittany Barron, who is 31 and one of Jonathan's coworkers, calls in to quit her job, and now she's missing too. Jonathan and Brittany are rumored to be having an affair. So did the two run off together, or has something more sinister happened? Listen to the Generation Y podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, or you can listen 1 week early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app.
Richard Buckland confessed to killing Dawn Ashworth, but insisted he had nothing to do with the murder of Linda Mann 3 years earlier. Police were convinced he was lying and set out to find the truth here at the University of Leicester, ironically less than 10 miles away from where both teenagers were murdered. Dr. Alec Jeffreys, a geneticist, had been researching hereditary diseases when he accidentally discovered an amazing technique called DNA, or genetic profiling.
There was a case of eureka. You could see individual identification. You could see parentage analysis, paternity disputes, sorting out immigration cases.
David Baker said, well, look, let's cement the case against this young man. Let's go to this geneticist at Leicester University, this Dr. Alec Jeffreys, and take the semen samples from both murders and cement our case with this new thing called genetic fingerprinting, whatever it is, and let's just prove that he did both of them because we know he must have done both of them.
Dr. Jeffreys wasn't sure that he could do what Baker wanted because this sort of analysis had never been done before. Dr. Jeffreys' breakthrough technique for analyzing DNA is called restriction fragment length polymorphism, or RFLP. It can identify an individual based on just a small amount of their DNA. DNA that can come from semen, blood, hair roots, and other cells. DNA is a complex chemical which is present in all living cells. It's a little like a computer program, containing coded instructions on how to make a human being. No two individuals have the same DNA pattern, except for identical twins. Dr. Jeffreys' task was to take the semen recovered from Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth and compare it to the blood sample from Richard Buckland to see if it was a match. First, white blood cells from Richard Buckland's blood sample were treated with a special chemical solution that allows the DNA, a sticky white substance, to float free. Next, the DNA is cut into smaller pieces using special proteins called restriction enzymes, which act like chemical scissors. The DNA fragments must then be sorted out by a process called electrophoresis. The DNA is marked with a radioactive dye and placed in separate lanes on an electrophoretic gel. Then it's subjected to an electric field. Under ultraviolet light, you can see how the electrical current draws the negatively charged fragments through the gel to the positive end of the tray. The separated fragments are then visualized on X-ray film called an autoradiogram, which resembles a barcode, showing an individual's unique genetic makeup. Dr. Jeffreys first used this technique to resolve an immigration case and after that, a paternity dispute. But this would be the first time it was ever attempted in a criminal case to reveal the identity of a double murderer.
Let's start with Linda Mann. This is her DNA profile taken from her hair. Next track is a mixture of semen and vaginal fluid from that victim, showing her DNA profile as expected, plus a single man semen DNA profile. Next victim, Dawn Ashworth. This is her blood DNA profile, a band here and another one off to the left. Trace amounts of semen recovered from that victim, both revealed 2 faint bands whose position on the autoradiograph is very similar to the semen profile seen from Linda Mann. So first conclusion, both girls have been raped and therefore presumably murdered by the same man. What about the prime suspect, Richard Buckland? This is his blood DNA profile here and here, completely different from the semen profile. Conclusion, Both girls had been raped and therefore presumably murdered by the same man, and that man was not the prime suspect, Richard Buckland.